You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe returns. Spencer German with you as we get you ready for what is maybe the biggest matchup of the season. It probably is. And maybe the biggest matchup of Ryan Day's career. Also probably true. We'll talk about all those things. We'll talk about what this game means for Ryan Day. There's a lot to get to on this episode, but I first want to remind you guys to like, follow, subscribe to the podcast, wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, the Odyssey app. Did I mention Apple? I'll mention it again just for good measure. You can also find us at the 92 Through the Fan YouTube channel. Like, comment, review the podcast there. We appreciate any way you interact with the show, and we will try to interact with you back. So, hi guys, how's everybody doing? I'm doing all right. A little bit nervous about this game on Saturday for a lot of reasons, but maybe more so than anything because of what this could mean for the state of this Ohio State program. And I am going to get into all those things. I actually had a pretty spirited debate with Nick Wilson on the airwaves at 92 Through the Fan, where we broke down the Ryan Day situation, and we don't see eye to eye on this topic anymore. So that'll be fun to get to here in a little bit. But we always preview these with a little bit of sort of a down the line of sort of topics or headlines to get us to, or maybe a good way to put it is like sections where we kind of give you some overarching points to reference as we preview this matchup. And that always starts with the upset scale. And so what's interesting about the upset scale this week is, like, last week we know Nebraska winning that game would have been a massive, massive upset for Ohio State. Like, that would have been just awful. Like, rock bottom moment for the program. Maybe not rock bottom moment, but it would have been an embarrassing moment for the program and for Ryan Day. They eke out the win. Penn State, though, like, Ohio State's favored in this game. We'll get to the lines and my picks and all those things coming up. And Ohio State but Ohio State is also the lower ranked team of the two. So on that front, like, if 4-3 would be, I guess, what you would define as an upset. But I actually do think like there's an upset element to this because of how Ryan Day and the Ohio State program under him and Urban Meyer have just basically owned Penn State over the years. Like, James Franklin is 1-9 against this team in his coaching tenure with the Nittany Lions. And so, like, there's like a monkey on the back of James Franklin here that he has to sort of try to shake. And you know, for it to be at Penn State, it's going to be a pretty raucous environment. People are going to be really into this one. There's going to be a lot of reason for excitement. And because of that, like, yeah, like, this feels like the type of game that if Penn State wins, the fans will storm the field, even though they're the higher ranked team, just because this Ohio State team has been like their boogeyman for so many years, which is also part of the reason why it's such a massive, massive game for Ryan Day. Because if it now feels like James Franklin has surpassed him in an offseason where you spent all this money to build this roster, that's going to be some egg on his face. So yeah, I think there's an upset element here. I don't know that we can call it like a true upset in nature. So on the upset scale, I'll say it's like it's a 10 out of 10 if we're sort of doing it by the letter of the law. But I don't know that we feel like these teams are like so vastly different that like if whoever wins, it's going to feel like that team was just the better team because they should be pretty evenly matched, and they both are really good teams this year in the landscape of college football. That brings us to the next headline here, the next bucket here, which is names to know. And I think you are sort of familiar with a lot of these Penn State names already. We know about Drew Aller, especially here in Northeast Ohio, because he's a Northeast Ohio kid. We don't know yet if he's going to play. And there's been some sort of shadiness on the part of James Franklin in terms of not giving much away in regards to injuries that this team is experiencing right now. And it's a couple different people that are in this bucket, but Aller obviously being the most notable of those. And I mean, listen, I think it's honestly probably some fair gamesmanship on the part of James Franklin to not give too much away there. I get why he's doing it. And I can't really fault him for that. It's fair that he's trying to sort of keep it kind of close to the vest, excuse me. And that's what you're going to kind of do going into these matchups. But I'll say this. I actually think that in this matchup, like, Prabula, their backup quarterback. That's such a crazy ass name to say for me. I don't know why. Prabhu. It's like a tongue twister. I just keep stuttering. Bo Prabula is actually, I think, a bigger issue for Ohio State if he was to play than Aller is. Aller, and that's not to say Aller is not a good player. Like he's a phenomenal player, going to be an NFL, one of these quarterbacks coming out that's probably a top pick for some team somewhere. And hopefully, I think all of us in Northeast Ohio are at least rooting for the kid to make it to that level and play some good football and be a solid NFL player. But like, what's interesting is the fact that like I think it's more so just a skill set thing. Like Drew Aller, you know what you're going to get. He can stand in the pocket, throw the ball downfield. He could pick apart this Ohio State defense the same way Dylan Gabriel did if they can't get pressure, and that's going to be part of this matchup here this weekend. But in the same breath, like Prabula is basically like he is Trace McSorley. He reminds me so much of Trace McSorley. It's not just because he wears number 9, but his ability to run, I think, is a bigger issue for Ohio State if he plays than what Aller kind of brings to the table. Aller, you kind of know what to expect. They made him look really bad last year. And so I think there's some confidence there that Ohio State could, get to him, rattle him a little bit, even though he's playing better football than he was a year ago. But with Prabula, there's less tape out there on him. And I don't know that you're as equipped to slow down sort of this dual threat type quarterback, even though he's not going to push the ball downfield as much like Drew would. It's just an interesting dynamic there. So I actually, maybe it's just because it's the devil that I'm more familiar with Drew Aller, that I'm less worried about going against him than Bo. But it's an interesting sort of situation here depending on who plays. That said, I think it's going to probably be Aller who plays. The gamesmanship from James Franklin, like I said, a smart move on his part, but I don't necessarily think that they're like, I just don't envision a situation where he doesn't suit up for this game. I don't think the injury was so serious that he couldn't have gone back in the game last week against Wisconsin if he didn't want to. So I found that to be pretty interesting. We also know about Nick Singleton. They're very talented running back, and in my opinion, one of the best running backs in college football. He's phenomenal. He's been a really, really good player throughout his career there at Penn State, and pretty much continues to be so. I remain impressed by him as a player, and he also can beat you in the passing game as well, which could be potentially a problem for Ohio State if they're not careful. So yeah, like I have been blown away by Nick Singleton over the years just in general, and you get these kind of close-up matchups in person against him. He's only got 483 yards on the ground so far this season, but he's averaging 6.4 yards per carry. A lot of that I think is just around like the offense that they've built here at Ohio, or at Penn State rather, where you have a team that's more based around Drew Aller. But that doesn't mean Devin Singleton. I'm trying to say Devin Singletary. Nicholas Singleton isn't like a threat to still break off some big runs and do some damage against you. On top of the fact that, like I said, he also has 4 receiving touchdowns, so he can beat you in that area of the game as well. That is a player that Ohio State has to account for on pretty much every play. There's also the interesting wrinkle of Julian Fleming being part of this team this year. He's a Pennsylvania guy playing for Penn State now, and a guy that you know well from his time at Ohio State, and kind of comes with some trade secrets of maybe what Ohio State wants to do. So I find that to be a little bit interesting as well. And then on the defensive side, it starts for Penn State really with their defensive line. That group is super, super talented. Abdul Carter is going to be probably a top defensive pass rusher in the NFL, prospect in the NFL. Dennis Sutton is dealing with an injury this week as well. And James Franklin's played that close to the vest in terms of injuries. He's done the same thing, by the way, with Anthony Donko, their right tackle, who injured himself in that Wisconsin game. So they're dealing with a couple different injuries here that they're sort of, not disclosing too much information on right now. But either way, like this defensive line is going to be a challenge. And we know that Ohio State is having some issues at left tackle specifically, but along the offensive line. and that's kind of reared its ugly head in recent weeks, most notably last week against Nebraska, against that really tough, big, physical Nebraska defensive line. And so that's going to be a challenge for this Ohio State team. And that, I think, actually leads into our key matchup for this game. Because Abdul Carter is such a good player. And him being sort of the right defensive end of this defense, I'm interested to see what this thing's going to look like in terms of how they utilize him, how they utilize their defensive line in general. If Dennis Sutton moves around, or if he is healthy, how they move guys around. If they move guys around, you don't see a ton of that all the time in college football, but I think like you have opportunities to exploit this Ohio State defense, offensive line, and this defensive line could certainly wreak some havoc against Ohio State. My guess is that what Ohio State's going to do on the offensive line, given the injuries at left tackle to this point, because now Zen Mikowski is dealing with an injury, and honestly, I don't want to say it's not a bad thing, because you never want to see people get hurt, and you never want to see, you never want to like wish for a guy not to be out there because of an injury. But on the same vein, like he was a turnstile against Nebraska. He was having some real issues. And so if the solution is you kick Donovan Jackson outside to the left tackle spot, and then Luke Montgomery gets kind of some run, who's one of their more talented lineman prospects that they have on this team right now. I'm actually kind of intrigued by that setup. I don't know that Donovan Jackson is going to be a great left tackle or anything, but I'm intrigued by the idea of seeing what your best offensive lineman being moved to left tackle looks like, and then seeing Luke Montgomery kind of in person for the first time and get some actual reps for this team. So I'm curious to see how that sort of setup goes. But either way, like this offensive line is going to be a bugaboo for Ohio State the rest of the season. There's just no way around that. It's going to be something that we're talking about week to week. And this matchup with Penn State is not advantageous to a group that is struggling with injuries and just struggling as well in general to make plays and open up holes for the two talented running backs that they have as well. That brings us to my educated wish, or the thing that I need to see, or I'm hoping to see from the Ohio State Buckeyes this weekend. And the answer is simple. I need to see Ryan Day beat a top 3 team. Boom. That's it. That's it. We know the record against the ranked teams at this point. We know he's struggled in these matchups, and I can't keep making excuses for him. At some point, he has to come out on top. This is a unique opportunity with a team that you generally beat, a coach that you go against that generally, maybe fumbles situations more than Ryan Day usually does, is maybe a good way to put it. Like James Franklin is known for, in the big moments, clenching a little bit, and this kind of feels like a battle of like which coach is going to clench first between him and Ryan Day, and usually that comes out with James Franklin being the one who does it first. And so if that happens, then you got to take advantage. Ryan Day is generally has beaten Penn State. It's one of the teams that he has owned during the course of his coaching tenure, and that's great. But this is a different sort of Penn State team, and they look poised to actually be a true playoff contender this year. Obviously, being 12 teams, it's likely they get in regardless. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting situation here, and I need Ryan Day to no longer be able like if he loses this game against a team that he's generally owned and a coach that he's generally owned, then I think it's just like he must be allergic to winning big games like that. There's no other conclusion to draw. This is the game that's like it should be like a shoe-in for you to beat a team that you generally beat. Even if it's a close game, I can live with that. Just get me a win over a top 3 team so that we can at least see you do it in a big spot. That's what we need at this point. That's what we all need at this point as Ohio State fans. And it's nothing. You don't have to overthink it. That's the answer. That's where we're at, and that's what it's got to be. And that brings us finally to the odds for this game. Our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook have Ohio State listed as 3.5-point favorites, even going on the road to Happy Valley. Tough place to play. Penn State's plus 136 in the money line. And then the over-under for this game is 45.5. That's pretty big margin. They think there's going to be some decent scoring in this game. I actually think the defenses could kind of rule the day here, and that could still maybe get you to 45 total between these two teams if it's like a 24-21 style game. But yeah, like these defenses are two of the best in the country. And so I think you could see sort of the chess match of the defense is kind of mucking this game up a little bit, and then which offense kind of comes out on top. And that maybe bodes well for Ohio State, who has these very talented players, especially at wide receiver and running back in the skill positions to maybe make some big plays. It's another big test for Will Howard in this game. I'm going to be honest, though, guys. After last week, I was being a little hyperbolic when I tweeted something during that game about Penn State by double digits. I don't think Penn State's going to win by double digits, but I'm taking Penn State to cover the spread, and I'm leaning towards the idea that I think they're going to win this game by a touchdown. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I am so soured on Ryan Day at this point. I'm so soured on this team at this point. It's super disappointing because I thought this year was going to be something special. And they fooled me again. I drank the Kool-Aid, and now they got to prove it to me. So until they do, this Nebraska game is just a bad taste in my mouth, and I can't possibly feel confident about picking them in a game like this, even though it's Penn State and a team that generally Ryan Day has had a lot of success against. Where are you at with this game? Where are you at with the spread and Ohio State being 3.5-point favorites? What are some things that you're watching in this one, and what is your educated wish, the thing that you need to see between Ohio State and Penn State this weekend? Like I said, for me, it's simple. I just need Ryan Day to come out of there with a win against the top 3 team. Let's take a break. When we get back after a quick word from our sponsors, Nick and I had a very emphatic debate on the airwaves at 92.3 The Fan about Ryan Day specifically and his place in Ohio State's program right now, his job security. We'll get into that when we get back right here on Sons of the Shoe. All right, guys, this next segment comes with a clip as Nick Wilson has sort of, if you couldn't tell by now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Nick Wilson has kind of taken a step back from this show. We will see what it looks like in the future in terms of a co-host for me. But I'm still here doing this thing because I love talking Ohio State. I love talking Ohio State with you guys, the fans. So very much looking forward to the road ahead, the season ahead, what the future holds for this podcast, with or without Nick. But that doesn't mean that Nick and I still don't get into our Donniebrooks over this Ohio State program. And on the Fan this week, 92 through the Fan here in Cleveland, I was co-hosting with Nick on the afternoon show, Afternoon Drive, and we did get into a little bit of a spat about Ryan Day and his future. Because you guys know at this point, if you listen regularly, where I stand on this. Like, at some point, he's got to own the record that he has. And Nick is still living in the clouds. Nick is the one person still holding out that you don't just fire Ryan Day. And it's not easy to find a replacement head coach. And he's living in his fears maybe in that way. I will let him speak for himself in this clip, but I'll react on the other side to again, where I'm at with this and why I do think this game is likely to decide Ryan Day's fate. But I think if you sat Ryan Day down and you explained to him, you're missing the mark on these areas, I think he would honestly understand it. I'm not saying he'd be happy about it.
No, he wouldn't.
This is the guy who comes out and he says in press conferences, I know that the standard at Ohio State is there's no bad days. You have to be perfect every day. He recognizes that he's falling short of the things that he's supposed to be hitting on.
I think you've told on yourself. I think you just want Ryan Day fired, and you're just hot in the britches for it.
I mean, I'm at a point right now where I justifiably I'm not sitting here defending him anymore. At some point, the record against ranked teams is the record against ranked teams.
You're just slamming your tail. This is not the standard.
I'm just at some point you have to own that. At some point it can't the difference with Urban would lose that random clunker in Purdue, and you'd be like, well, this is stupid. How do you lose to Purdue? But then he'd get in the playoff, and he'd beat a team like Alabama, and he would beat the teams that he was paid to beat.
He won one national championship in a decade, or not even 8 years, and a team that could have won a national championship every year. How is that? Urban was never. Well, I guess he
Ryan
won a
Day
national
has never
championship.
won a national championship.
But
that matters heavily.
He's 62
and he never lost
9.
to Michigan. That's the difference.
He is 62.
Those are the two major
9.
differences between Ryan Day and Urban Meyer. What do you mean? What's the difference? A championship, and he's never lost to Michigan, and then Ryan Day's here
Well, no, my point is Urban's teams. If we really want to get real about it, Urban's teams post the title consistently underperformed to their talent. They put generational talent into the NFL and consistently didn't win another championship when they probably should have had 2, maybe 3. And they were constantly a half mark off or a full mark off Alabama and Clemson. But we don't talk about that. Well, because he won one early.
So Nick's playing the game where it's like, spot the differences between these two pictures. And one's Ryan Day and one's Urban Meyer. And it's like, he's got a title. He's got Big Ten titles. He's beaten Michigan and never lost. And then the other side's like, yeah, his stuff looks about the same. I don't see any difference.
That's not what I said. What I'm saying is there can be a gap between those two. And the reality is Urban Meyer also underperformed more often than not.
All right, so I do on some level, like Nick is correct that Urban Meyer's teams were underperforming after the championship year. Like those teams fell short of the main goal, especially that team immediately after that we all called like the most talented team in college football that year. They were running it back with basically everybody, and it was like, man, who's going to beat this team? This team's too damn good. And then they fumbled the bag against Michigan State and didn't make the playoff that year. And it was a 14 playoff, and that was just kind of you had to live with the results at that time. But the difference is like when you have a championship to tout over everybody, that buys you some time, that buys you leeway, and you have the proof that you have won in that at that level. Ryan Day doesn't have that. And like I said at the beginning of that clip, this is the key thing, because I understand on some level what Nick is saying. Like everything that Ryan Day has accomplished to this point, it's not easy to get to accumulate the record 62-9 that he's accumulated over the course of his time at Ohio State. I understand that, and I can respect that. I can respect the fact that what he's doing is a dream for most programs in college football. But at Ohio State, it is just not enough. It is not what the standard is supposed to be at Ohio State. And you can make fun of me and be like, oh, the standard. Another fan base is probably like, who cares about the standard and blah, 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 blah. Like, stop living with your Ohio State vibrato, if you will. But like that is just the reality of the situation that we live in, right? Like at any other program where Ryan Day had his resume would be maybe the greatest coach that program's ever seen. And most teams could live with that. But at Ohio State, there's a certain expectation, and he hasn't even done like the bare minimum of the expectation in the last 3 years, which is beat Michigan. That is at least the one thing that you have to be able to do as the Ohio State coach, and he hasn't even done that. And then on top of that, you add in the fact that like he hasn't supplemented that or made up for that with a championship. Granted, yeah, like there's the context of if he beats Georgia that one year, maybe they go on and win against TCU. I would like to think they probably would have gone on to win against TCU that year. So there's context there. But I've said this the last couple weeks. I can't just keep making excuses for Ryan Day when he loses these big games just because there's context to explain it away. I can look back at the Oregon game and say, okay, it makes sense that, you know, they ran this fluky 12-man on the field thing to take advantage of a rule and you lose that game. They had an onside kick at one point in that game. There were some, you know, things that a bad offensive pass interference call on Jeremiah Smith. Like there's reasons why they lost that game that weren't just Ryan Day. But when you have now countless examples of those big games not going your way because of certain things in the margins, eventually that just does become a reflection on you. And eventually that does just become something that I can no longer ignore and say, you know what, it's not Ryan Day's fault anymore. Like, no. And I stand by what I said at the start of that clip. Like, Ryan Day sits there and he talks all the time about how he knows there's a different standard at Ohio State. There's no bad days at Ohio State. You have to be perfect at Ohio State. These are words that he has used to describe the situation that he's in as the coach of Ohio State. So I can't just sit there and not hold him to that same standard that he even recognizes. And so if he was to get fired after the season, I do think like would he be happy about it? Probably not. Would he try to make his case as to why he should keep the job? Probably so. But I think in his heart of hearts, he would understand why it would happen if he loses to Penn State and maybe they miss the playoff, or if he doesn't get his team to a Big Ten championship game, which is something that with Urban's teams, like they never fell short of at least that goal and the Michigan goal. If he were to lose to Michigan again, like these are things that you can no longer ignore. I think in his heart of hearts, he would have to understand why it was no longer tenable between Ohio State and him, between the program and him. That's just the reality of the situation you're in. If you don't have the stomach to coach at Ohio State, then you should no longer coach at Ohio State. And he always talks the talk like he knows what it takes to coach at Ohio State. So I would imagine that he has to understand if that were to happen, why it would happen. I just can't keep doing this with him, man. he has to at some point show up in these games, which is why, and that whole conversation started from the idea that Nick thinks it's preposterous that people are saying like this game could decide Ryan Day's fate, and it's the biggest game of his tenure, and all these different narratives that are sort of surrounding Ryan Day in relation to this game. He thinks that stuff is all preposterous. I disagree. I think if you lose this game to Penn State, like he is squarely in the focus of the microscope the rest of the way. And even if you beat Michigan, which, listen, let's face it, that Michigan team, by the time they play Ohio State, they could be like a 500 team by then. We don't even know what that's going to look like. So, they'll probably win. They should win. But if they lose this game, I'm not going to be convinced they're going to win that game either. And it's not because of anything Michigan's doing. It's more so just because I don't trust this Ohio State team at this point. So that's another thing that's kind of on the line here for this weekend is like, if they don't beat Penn State, how are they going to beat Michigan? Are we sure about that? So, but again, like I'm picturing they probably win that game because they're the more talented team anyway, and that's fine. But I still think like if you lose 2 games, if your strength of schedule isn't great, and then you do get kept out of the playoff, or even if you get in, maybe they give him a shot to sort of redeem himself. But do I have any faith that they're going to like pull this thing out in the playoff and make some miraculous run? Probably not. And so then there's a legitimate conversation there of like, what's the future hold for this guy? Like, this game could theoretically decide what happens with him, because if you lose another top 3 matchup to a team that you've generally owned, you put yourself behind the 8 ball now to try to win a Big Ten championship, which is something that Ryan Day hasn't done since, I guess, his first year with the program. Like, you are setting yourself up in a situation where from here, you're leaving it up to other people to decide. If you win this game, it's still, you still sort of control your own destiny here. If you don't, now you're leaving it in the hands of the boosters and the people that invested in this team and put money into this program to try to get it to a point where it was going to be, this unstoppable force against a team like Nebraska, which it wasn't. That's the problem. That is why this game, I do think is like, I think he's coaching for his job. And that doesn't mean he's going to get fired this weekend if they lose. I still think they would let him see through the end of the regular season at the very least. But I do think like this one, basically, like if you're on a teeter-totter, or this is the one that's like, if he loses this one, I think it starts to completely flip heavily the other direction where it's like, nope, we can't do this anymore. And it might be time to just part ways and cut your losses. That's where I'm at with it. And I think a lot of people agree. I understand it sounds hyperbolic, and that's what Nick is alluding to. But I do think on some level, like that's what this game means. It's a massive one for Ryan Day, and it's a massive one for the Buckeyes if they're going to somehow save their season and get people trusting again that they're still actually a national title contender. Because you got national people like Ari Wasserman talking about how he's not so sold on Ohio State being a title contender anymore, and other people are saying the same damn thing. So either go out and prove it, and prove that you are the coach for this job and that you can actually beat top 3 teams, or sorry, you leave it in the hands of the people, the people above you to make the decision on whether or not you're the right coach for this program moving forward. And that's just how it is at Ohio State. That's life at Ohio State. And Ryan Day says he knows that that's life at Ohio State. So at the end of the day, that's got to be enough. You got to deliver. You've had enough time to get there. If you're not there yet, it is a real legitimate conversation of whether or not he should be the guy moving forward. And I'm right there with many of you. What is Ryan Day coaching for his job on Saturday against Penn State? Your thoughts on that at the 92 to the Fan YouTube channel, or you can hit me up on Twitter at Spencito_. We take one final break when we get back. 4 down territory to get us out of here on Sons of the Shoe. All right, guys, final segment, and I want to start actually with an Ohio State-related topic, something I alluded to in my rant there about Ryan Day, and it's just the idea of and this is first down. We need like some imaging here, like first down. First down is just a question in relation to Ohio State. Does a 2-loss Ohio State make the playoff? This was another thing that I actually got into with Nick during that segment, which you can find at 92throughthefan.com. or in the Odyssey app, or wherever you get your podcasts, at the little breakdowns they do of each and every single segment that we have. That was on Wednesday's show, by the way, if you're looking for it. But regardless, so this is interesting because I've talked about this a little bit before. Nick's point on this was like, they're still Ohio State, they're still a big brand. And if you lose 2 games, then it's to 2 of the top 3 teams in the country at the times that they were ranked. I don't know that necessarily means like you're out of the playoff picture entirely. Like you have to fall basically below like 12. Granted, you're talking about conference winners getting in that maybe depending on where they're ranked, maybe Notre Dame gets in if they come all the way back from the NIU loss, whatever it might be. So yes, there is a world where Ohio State still gets in because they're a big brand and they're just like the 11th seed or the 12th seed or something like that. But again, I mentioned leaving Ryan Day's fate up to the powers that be if he loses this weekend to Penn State. The same thing happens with the playoff committee. Because if your two losses are to Oregon and Penn State and your strength of schedule is what it is, and you only have one ranked opponent left on your schedule the rest of the way in Indiana, which is coming up later in November, and maybe they win that one, maybe they don't win that one. I wouldn't be so sure that they I'm not convinced they win that game because Indiana's a wagon right now under Kurt Signetti. And that program's just on fire. So in a good way. But yeah, there's no guarantee they lose that one either. And if they're a 3-loss Ohio State team, I don't care what your brand is. I think you're out. I don't think they're making the playoff with 3 losses. If it's 2 losses and you have one against a ranked team, maybe that's enough because you're Ohio State and your losses were to good teams. And especially if it comes down to the wire. But man, I don't know. You're leaving a lot of up to other people if you lose this game because your strength of schedule in the out of conference was just so weak. That brings us to number 2. This was a pretty funny moment. Second down with Mike Elko, head coach of Texas A&M, after his team beat LSU. 2 clips here. First one, this was him after the game, and it seemed like he took a shot at his predecessor.
Yeah, I think it's the way we talk to the young people. I think the things that we talk about, the messaging, how we bring really good people into the building. We talk about doing things together. We talk about culture, and everyone talks about it. But then we go out and we live it every day. And I think we back up our actions. We're very honest. We're very open. And this is a real program. It's not fake. It's not a politician running this program, talking fast and BSing everybody. This is a real program. And for all the recruits out there, this is a real place. And if you want to be really good at football.
So the comment there at the end about this is a real program, this isn't some fast talking politician running things. That's the line that everybody was wrapped up in. And it felt like he was taking a shot at Jimbo Fisher. I actually thought he could have been taking a shot at Brian Kelly too, who he obviously had just beating LSU on the other side of the matchup, because Brian Kelly, as we know, is notorious for changing his accent just based on where he's coaching at the time. So I kind of thought that was funny. And my first thought was that it was actually Brian Kelly, but I guess I could see where people made the link to Jimbo Fisher. He explained himself this week. Here was his comments on what he meant.
Just the last thing, and it's just comical that I actually have to do this, but it's necessary. In the post game, I was asked to kind of give a synopsis on how we sell culture to our program. In doing so, I made a statement that seemed like a very benign statement that somehow managed to be taken as a shot directly at people. You guys gave me multiple opportunities in 9 months to take shots at people, and I've never done it. I have nothing but respect for Coach Fisher. I've said nothing but positive things about Coach Fisher. I'm the head coach at Texas A&M because of Coach Fisher. I appreciate who he is, everything that he's done. And for anybody in the media to think that was what I was doing post LSU is it's asinine. And for it to be about any other head coach who gave me an opportunity and hired me, and that's not who I am. I've never been that person, and it's ridiculous. But it is what it is. So I wanted to make sure that everybody knows I wasn't talking to anybody directly. So from there, I'll open it up to questions.
Down front, Brent.
So clarifying the comments there, Mike Elko strikes me as a pretty genuine guy, so I think he was being sincere there. But I love the idea that he put that out there into the abyss, and we were able to run with it and make our assumptions. And I'm just going to live in a world where I think he was talking about Brian Kelly because I think that's funny, and I think Brian Kelly can sometimes be a clown. So I'm going to live in that reality, even if it's not the real actual world that we live in. All right, let's go to third down. Are we sleeping on the Miami Hurricanes? This is to me, this is a fascinating question because they haven't beaten anybody that that stands out where you're oh, that team. But listen, they're 8-0. They are one of only a handful of teams that are still undefeated in the country as a whole. And they have the quarterback to go with everything else, and the swag of that program that we kind of think of in the 90s Miami University teams, the early 2000s Miami University teams. Like or I guess University of Miami. I don't know why I said it that way. But yeah, like I think I want to take them seriously. I do. And I do think they probably come out on top in the ACC. Granted, Clemson could give them some issues, and that's kind of like it's basically a collision course for those two programs for the ACC title at some point is the assumption. And they've had some slip-ups. Like they nearly lost to Cal. They were down big in that game and had to come back. And they have a quarterback that can work some magic and pull you out of some of those deficits. But the one thing holding me back from taking them seriously is just I'm waiting for Mario Cristobal to do something Mario Cristobal like where he just mismanages a game. I'm waiting for Miami to do something Miami's done over the last decade plus, where they just like lose a game they shouldn't, and they do something stupid, or they have a bad outing. I don't know what it is, but like I'm just waiting for that other shoe to drop with them, and that's why I sort of hold off. But I think it's time to start at least thinking about the idea that program is for real, and that they could present some challenges for anybody in the college football playoff, mostly because of the quarterback that they have in Cam Ward, who's phenomenal. I wish was playing for Ohio State, if we're being honest with ourselves. And that brings us to fourth down. And I asked the question, who is the real king in the SEC? The SEC is basically like it's everyone's picking each other off. Texas A&M, like I mentioned with Mike Elko, they're the only undefeated team in the SEC, so they're kind of like kings of the castle right now. I don't know if that program is going to be there quite yet, but I think they're playing very phenomenal football. I thought it was Texas for a while. I thought Tennessee had a chance for a while, but I'm going to be honest, man. I think Bama sort of is fading, and they have some other matchups coming up that like basically are going to decide their fate in terms of the playoff. I at the end of the day, though, like when you don't really know, you go with you go with the thing that you're most familiar with, and you go with the team that it tends to be the most consistent, and that's Georgia. I mean, I can't bet against Kirby Smart, and it just feels like in the end, even though they had that stumble against Bama, that's the program that's going to come out on top. They have the talent to get there. They have the coach to get there, and so I'm going to say Georgia, but like that SEC. With the new NIL era and the playing field kind of being more leveled with all these programs now and recruiting and talent-wise, it is you will talk about the Wild Wild West like people are saying it is in college football in general right now. That SEC is a Wild Wild West right now. It's a lot of fun to watch each week, and they're kind of cannibalizing each other. We'll see what that means for the playoff picture, but man, has it been fun to sort of watch all those programs compete. And I'm just going to sort of fall back on Georgia because it's the one thing that I kind of know over the course of history, at least recent history. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us on another episode of Sons of the Shoe. Find it wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, the Odyssey app, Apple. If I didn't mention it already, I think I did, but I'm just mentioning it again anyway. And we implore you to find me, and if you want to watch the show, at the 92 to the Fan YouTube channel, where we post the show each and every single week. Appreciate you guys jumping on in. I look forward to reacting with you, good or bad. I might be an emphatically angry Spencer after this game. We'll have to see how it goes. But on Saturday, when Ohio State meets Penn State, it's a massive showdown in the Big Ten. I'm going to be emotional one way or another. And I don't know, maybe I'll reverse my entire feelings. I'm right. No, I won't. But if they win, but we'll see. I look forward to talking about it with you guys. And it's a big one. Go Bucks.